I made you an owner. This segment is on bylaws. As we have talked about many times before, what makes the United States unique is that we are a country governed by laws, aspirationally at the very least.
Nice. Sometimes. Sort of.
And so bylaws is where you encapsulate how power is distributed from the assembly, because the whole concept of democracy and uh, interestingly about how Athens implemented democracy, everyone got to vote and when they made decisions. So 1,000 people get to vote, and there's no representative government. So that's like the purest form of democracy. And so in that instance, everyone has all the power is held in the assembly. What we typically do is elect representatives to do things for us, which is a sort of an evolution of democracy, and how power then is allocated from the assembly to other people then is all described within the bylaws. And so what we're going to talk about today is what should belong in the bylaws, and then what to watch for when things get allocated out and you find that you've been screwed and you've lost all your power because you've been talked out of it. Anyway,
nice.
let's go to the first slide on the hierarchy of rules.
We will.
So,
hang on, I just want to tell everybody, thank you, Jeff, for being here, and Oz for being here, and Bev, if you're really here, or I don't know if you took off. If you have questions about this stuff, I will be looking at them, and I can show them on the screen because we have new fancy stuff that live stream added, so yay. So there we go. Now, carry on with slide 2. Yeah, they integrated it, so I can just show the YouTube comments now. All right. Slide 2.
So there is a hierarchy of rules, and this is found to be useful because there are some rules that you don't want to change, and then there's how parliamentary procedure fits in all this, and then how you do things procedurally, where you want to have something mapped out, but you want to have the flexibility of changing them. So the bylaws is where you define the primary characteristics of the organization. And then underneath that are the rules of order, such as Robert's Rules of Order or Mason's Rules of Order or any of the other flavors of rules of order, which refers to the written rules of parliamentary procedure that govern how things are handled within the organization. And then going to the next slide, you have special rules of order, which can supersede any of the rules in the parliamentary authority. So sometimes you want to modify something that's in the parliamentary authority, like how many times people can speak and for how long, those kinds of things that you can then, if 2/3 of the assembly agree, you can modify. And you have to pass this by a 2/3 vote because this is taking away or curtailing the rights of the assembly in some manner. And then there's the standing rules, which relate to the administration of a society rather than to parliamentary procedure. And all it takes is a majority vote to change those. But those are handy because you might want to have a procedure for, say, electing delegates to the State Central Committee or something where it's not obvious how it should be run, and people want a consistent process that you want to follow. And so you can bake those into your standing rules, but you also have the flexibility of changing them if for some reason you need to. So on the next slide, content and composition. So bylaws contain the basic rules of an organization that relate to itself. And they are the most important rules that an organization must compose. And the content of a society's bylaws has important bearing on the rights and duties of the members. So as I was saying earlier, this is where all the rights start out being held by the assembly, and then as a matter of convenience, those rights might be allocated out to elsewhere. The next slide is directly out of Robert's Rules of Order, and so this is driving that point home. The content of a society's bylaws has important bearing on the rights and duties of members and on the degree to which the general membership is to retain control of or be relieved of detailed concern with a society's business. And this, where the rubber hits the road on this one is things like who gets to call committee meetings. if you'd been following the Democratic Party of Oregon stuff earlier, you saw there was a disagreement over who could call Rules Committee meetings when the chair of the Rules Committee didn't call them. And those are the kinds of things where this is really explicit. You know, if the right to call a meeting has not been explicitly given to someone, then that falls back and belongs to the assembly.
And what happened there, Larry?
We came to a gentleman's agreement that what we did was valid, although no one uttered those words. So being valid, we had a majority of the Rules Committee call a meeting because the chair wasn't calling a meeting. It was not responding to requests for a meeting. And so we called our own meeting, which any two members can do. And then there was a big brouhaha about, well, you don't have the right to do that. It's like, well, we didn't give the right to do that away. And so, yes, we do have the right to do that.
Thank you for explaining that to everybody out there. This is why we need to know Robert's rules, because if Larry and others hadn't spoken up and understood what was going on, we never would have been able to challenge it. And in the end, basically won. So thank you.
And for years, you know, we were sheeple and we thought, oh, yeah, we're all on the same team and we're all working for the common good. And so we trusted our leadership a little too much. And we found ourselves now in a situation with certain aspects of the bylaws and processes where we need to pull back some of those rights into the assembly.
Yes.
So the next slide is also directly out of Robert's Rules. Except as the rules of a society may provide otherwise, members attending meetings has full and sole power to act for the entire organization and does so by majority vote. Again, this is all about the power belonging to the assembly and not anyone else unless it's been given away. Any limitations on standing delegation of the assembly's power can only be by provision in the bylaws. So if you have not given away power in the bylaws, it has not been given away. The next slide about creating bylaws. This whole section is really long, and it's only if you are writing bylaws for the first time. So if you're going to do that, then I would recommend going to seeing pages 566 to 570, because they have good recommendations on how to do that in a way that is least time consuming. This is one of the most tedious and onerous things you can do. I've done this a couple of times in my life, and for one organization, I swear to God, we spent 6 months working on the bylaws as opposed to the mission of the organization. And so I would really, recommend you finding the most expeditious way to get agreement on the bylaws so you can get to the primary focus of whatever you're trying to do.
I second that motion. I had the same experience forming a nonprofit. Anyway.
Indeed.
Just a quick message out there. Hi, everybody. We've got some new people that have joined the conversation. Hey, Schulte, Ego Sutra, Jeffrey, Real. I just want to say, I know we're not talking about news right now. We're talking about Robert's Rules and how to, run your government. Okay, how to take over your government at a local level or control what's going on in aspects of your government. And that really is the most important thing we need to hold on to. I know we're all enraged and pissed off about what's happened. Larry's been in France enjoying a good socialist time, so he really didn't see the headlines. Everybody's just kind of talking about how upset they are, Larry, in the chat. I just want to address it and just say, yeah, it blows. That's why we got to do this stuff. So, there. All right.
And better late than never,
Yes.
The Republicans have been working on what's going on for years, and this is the culmination of years and millions of dollars. So this was not instantaneous, and a lot of people saw this coming, but not a majority.
Yeah, the entire Supreme Court thing, my understanding is that is a 40-year strategy that was just executed and completed. Okay, 40 years. Think about that. Anyway, move on. Where are we at?
Back to the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So content of bylaws articles. So if you've ever seen a set of bylaws, they're broken down into articles. And what we're going to do next is talk about what the common articles are and what they mean and things to watch out for. So what I'm talking about in this one covers the requirements of most organizations. There might be some unique aspects of your organization that requires you to add something else. But Robert's Rules actually does a good job of walking through some options that you can add and to make them fit what you need. So the next slide is the basic list of the articles that you would find, and they're in a very specific order. So the order is hierarchical. It starts with the name of the organization, and then it just starts going down into more and more detail. What is the objective of the organization? What is it that your organization is supposed to do? Then who is a member? Then who the officers are, and then the rules on the meetings, and then the rules on the executive board, and then how committees are formed, and then the parliamentary authority that is underlying your organization, and amendment of the bylaws. So that's how to amend it. And these are, it's a pretty simple set. It's only 9 articles that you need to define unless you have some extraordinary circumstances. So what we're going to go through now is the 9 articles. So on slide, I don't have my glasses, so I can't. Okay, so the Article 1 is the name, and so it's a very simple article. It's a one-liner. It's the full, exact, and properly punctuated name of the society, spelled out. And so this is actually kind of a legal requirement, so you don't confuse your organization with a similar sounding organization. Should you get drug into court and you're arguing over what bylaws governs. The next slide is about the object, and what this is the objective of the society. Robert's Rules recommends that you express it as a single sentence, and this one is actually very important, although it's not maybe obvious at this point. The statement should be as general in its application, since it sets the boundaries within which the business can be introduced at the society's meetings. So if your objective is to elect members to Congress from a specific party, if you want to go and start building swimming pools, that's not within the objective of your organization. And so you would have to have an agreement and a vote by 2/3 to go off and do something else that's not within the objective of what's been stated. And you can probably imagine that there's some closer related things that people might want to do with an organization that is where this starts becoming a bit more ambiguous.
But is that where they, committees and subcommittees and stuff come in, or is that just you need a really well-written sentence?
You need a well-written sentence because everything falls out from that. It defines on basically, it scopes what you do as an organization.
Right.
Excuse me. The next one is a really important one because this is about membership. We've talked about membership a lot previously. The big controversy in the Nevada delegate selection convention in 2016 was who was a member and who was able to vote inside the convention. And so that was contentious because there was a disproportionate number of Sanders delegates that were not certified, they were not credentialed to participate, and so that's what started off at least one of the floor fights. So the membership has several sections. It should talk about the classes of membership if there's more than one. Like in the Democratic Party of Oregon, we have state central committee members, we have alternate members, and then we have people who are members, but they don't have voting rights. And so that's a special class of membership that's defined. And then you should very clearly state the qualifications for eligibility for membership with application and acceptance procedures, including the method of reviewing and voting on applications. So what we deal with mostly in the topics here is with democratic organizations where people are formally elected, and that's how they become members of county committees. And then everything from that is elected. So like delegates to the State Senate Committee is defined inside the bylaws of the Democratic Party of Oregon. And so it's very clear on who's a member and who's not a member, because what you don't want is a big argument at your credentials table on someone who should be a member but is not on the list. That's very important information that shouldn't be allocated out.
All right, so this defines rights for everybody's, and that's important to know. Just for the Oregon Dems, do I have to be an elected Democrat in order to run for a DPO office?
Yes.
Yes, you do. Okay.
That's a criteria.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good to know. All right.
And we had one of the former president of our chapter in the Rose City unit of the National Association of Parliamentarians is from the Libertarian Party. And they went through a period where there were actually 2 delegations from Oregon attending their national convention. And so there was a big fight over which delegation was the legitimate delegation to vote. And so that's why it's so important for this to be articulated clearly. If everyone's following the happy path and everyone's getting along, then it's not an issue. But as soon as there's a disagreement on who's eligible to participate, then that's when this becomes critically important.
Yeah, and don't be intimidated by the fact that you have to be elected to run for a DPO office. I'm elected. That's what a PCP is, the bottom rung. So you become that, and then you can run for whatever. So I just wanted to go there. But it's important. That's why a PCP as an elected person is an important role in the Democratic Party. Or in democracy.
And the membership there is defined in state law. So these are rights that cannot be taken away from you by the county organization. It's defined in state law, and so that's what makes you legitimate.
There you go.
Just so you know, it's also very difficult to get rid of precinct committee persons. You have to be recalled. And if your county wants to recall someone, and there have been times where PCBs get so egregious in their behavior that everyone just wants to get the hell out.
Really?
Get them the hell out. Yeah.
Oh.
Believe it or not.
Well, I mean, I've been waiting for Nancy to scold me for not walking my neighborhood as often. That would be going to recall me for doing that. That's what I don't do. But, yeah, let me just say, PCP basically means you get to know your neighbors and you talk to them about the election. You don't even have to talk to them about specific stuff. Just say it's coming up. That's really all it is, everybody. Paying attention to what's going on and maybe going to your county meetings when they have them. But anyway, go on. Just want to...
The next slide is a little bit more on membership. So we don't have fees for memberships inside the Democratic Party, but if you do have an organization like a fishing club or something, you might have some kind of fees and dues that need to be paid. And all these things need to be very clearly spelled out inside your bylaws. So there's no disagreement over who's a legitimate member. You cannot take away someone's voting rights because they haven't been paying their dues. Mm-hmm. The process for actually getting rid of someone should be spelled out clearly. So everyone knows what the rules are. Requirements for attendance or participation should be spelled out. So periodically we get people upset because members are not attending meetings to their satisfaction and they want to get rid of them. Well, the process for getting rid of them has to be clearly spelled out. It can't be, well, they don't come and we're going to throw them out. You can't do that. And then you should also have provisions for resignations and how to fill positions, and for honorary memberships if you have them. Any questions on membership?
No questions on membership. Just some comments. Just that this is what we need. This is the kind of resistance we need, and being a PCP is a great way to get to know your neighbors. But no questions directly on this information right now. So,
yes, and those of us who want a government that is for the people need to get their representatives as members of all of these organizations inside the structure so that we are represented.
Exactly.
Article 4 is about officers. This is a statement of the officers that are required and how they should be elected or appointed. Officers rank in the order listed. So the order is typically president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, or something, and that order is relevant. So those should be written very carefully. If Robert's Rules of Order is your parliamentary authority, you shouldn't have to be redundant and state anything inside your bylaws that are already stated in the parliamentary authority, because they're your default guideline on what these roles entail. But if you want to change things around, then this is where you do it, and you put them in the bylaws, so it's very clear what the duties of the secretary is, what the duties of the treasurer is, and what the duties of the vice chair or vice president is. Sometimes vice presidents are made in charge of membership, and that kind of thing goes on. Those need to be spelled out inside the bylaws. The next slide. So this is an important point, and this talks about the allocation of rights and responsibilities. Great care must be taken in the writing of the article not to admit any duty, since the implication that duty is not required could be read into the omission. So if there's something that needs to happen, it needs to be spelled out in terms of a duty that is expected of an officer. And likewise, you can't expect officers to do things that are not articulated in the bylaws.
This also applies then, I would imagine, to committees, and making it very clear what they are responsible for and not, so that we avoid situations.
Yes, and that comes up in the next article on committees.
Well, look at that. Well, first we got more on officers though. There's more.
Yes. So this is where, in this article, is where you put the process for nominating officers. An election by ballot should be prescribed in the section pertaining to elections and terms of office, often with additional details of election procedure. So you cannot do a election by acclamation if your bylaws do not say that you can do that, even if there's only one candidate up. If your bylaws do not allow that, then you still have to go through the formal procedure of your membership voting for an officer, even though they're the only ones on the ballot. And that one also should be used carefully, because it kind of precludes the ability to do write-in candidates, which is a key part of elections. On the next slide, if it is desired to elect by mail or by plurality vote, or by preferential voting, or by cumulative voting, this must be expressly stated, and necessary details of the procedure should be prescribed. Many people are interested in alternate forms of voting. If you're more than welcome to adopt those, but what you need to do is make sure that they're baked into, baked into your bylaws by a 2/3 vote. So there is more than just a majority in agreement that this is how you should proceed. The length in terms of office should be prescribed, and when the term of office begins. Sometimes that begins immediately upon election, and sometimes it begins at the end of the meeting, which is a little more graceful way to do it. And then careful thought should be given to the process for removal of officers. Sometimes you have to, you end up with a crazy officer and you have to remove them. So that process the recall process should be spelled out.
So before you move on, I got a couple interesting things here from the crowd. Jeffrey Pearson asked this question: is there a limit to the amount of members and officers to committees? I guess where would that be defined?
So there's two things there. Is there a limit to the officers? Yes. The officers have to be listed. You can't make up officers that are not listed in the bylaws. And then on the memberships of committees, the default is there's no limit to the number of people on committees. I'm finding that the best way to form a committee, if you're going to form a special committee, is to state in the motion how the membership will be selected and who will chair it. In the Democratic Party of Oregon, the standing committees are are very clearly spelled out about who can be on them and how they're elected and how many can be elected. So, for instance, in the Democratic Party of Oregon Rules Committee, we have 5 congressional districts, and each congressional district organization can elect 3 delegates to the Rules Committee for a total of 15, and then 3 alternate delegates who takes the place of delegates if any of them cannot attend a meeting.
Wow.
And then we have a handful of extra members that can be appointed by the chair of the Democratic Party of Oregon and by the chair of the Rules Committee. So all that is clearly spelled out. So you can't do things like PAC committees.
Ah, interesting. Good to know. We got a couple other questions here. One from Oz. Can the bylaws define the powers and specifically state the limitations of the chair? Is that in bylaws or is that somewhere else?
That's in the bylaws. And you shouldn't have to state the limitations because there's nothing that they have that is not expressly given to them. So if you want the ability to call meetings given to the chair, then that has to be stated. If anything is not stated in the bylaws, then defaults to just parliamentary procedure. And as the previous slide said, anything that's not listed, if you start listing things and something's not listed, then it is not there. There is no assumption of duties and rights and powers that's not listed if you've gone to the effort of listing them.
Awesome. We're gonna yeah, it does. It does. And I think we talked about that. Well, I know we've talked about that with the DPO before. I want to address this question, but this is I understand where it's coming from. Bylaws, schmylaws, says Julie Love. The DNC breaks there, so what's the point? Is the DNC truly breaking their bylaws, or are they actually operating under their bylaws, or we just weren't aware what they were?
Oh, well, it's kind of both. Like the bylaws clearly stated under W. Wasserman Schultz that preference should not be given to one candidate over another, and it was clear from all the evidence that was revealed in emails and even in their behavior that there was a definite preference for Hillary Clinton and that they had tilted the scales. So there's that going on, which is a breaking of the bylaws. Again, it's a gentleman's agreement or a gentleperson's agreement that we abide by the law, by the rules, and that's what holds this whole country together. Because if you start ignoring that, then you just have chaos. So. All right. So what you do is you find, like what Congress does, when they lower the threshold for the approval of appointments from 60% to 50%, because they're just tired of being blocked by, the Republicans are tired of being blocked by Democrats, or vice versa. That's where they change the rules so that the rules are more favorable to them. And so they're still abiding by the rules, but they've changed the rules. But they're following the rules.
Right. So the way to combat that, I mean, we're talking about local level politics, and it's easier to combat those things at local level politics. But at the national level, the only way to do that is through national level delegates, or is there a way to do that other than putting people in power at the top?
Yeah, it all goes to who you elect. So, if you elect a corrupt chair or president, then the odds of them following the rules to the level that you would like is probably going to be low. So it's important to elect ethical, honorable people into these roles, and the criteria for electing them should be that they will uphold the bylaws. The president swears on January 20th to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America.
Right. Yeah. So again, it comes down to that, and I use big air quotes, gentleman's agreement. Yeah. Because, so you're right, Julie Love, but this is why we take so what I'm hearing you say, Larry, is that, we have to take power at the bottom so that we can place our people at the top. And that's really where we're sitting here.
Yes.
All right, then. Slide.
And, the question about the DNC and how to affect that's we would have to get into the bylaws of the DNC and dissect how power has been allocated and determine if it can be taken back under the existing bylaws or if the bylaws have to be changed.
There you go. and that means getting rid of Nancy and Chuck and a whole bunch of other people at the top. So it means voting, everybody. You move on. Slide 18.
This should be, since a reasonable rotation in office is desirable in almost all organizations, a section of this article may well provide that no person shall be eligible to serve, X number of consecutive terms in the same office. We've talked about this problem in Oregon, where we have people in the legislature who have been there far too long, and it's just not healthy for a number of reasons. And the sledgehammer solution is to institute term limits, which isn't a great idea. But you have this problem of, like, the Democratic Party building a culture of insulating the incumbents from challengers, which perpetuates the existing situation. So it
infuriates me.
Yeah,
to be honest.
Certainly in organizations, you can do term limits, and it's just not healthy to have someone serve basically more than 4 times in an office, just because you need to grow other people and build their skill set. So yes, you might be the greatest chair on earth, but for you to hold that position for 25 years is not healthy, because you have prevented a number of other people from occupying that position, maybe in a less optimal way in the short term, but at least you've got other people learning the skill set. And for the current time, nobody's living forever. So at some point you will be leaving office.
Yeah. And some people, like Peter Courtney, should have left the office a decade ago. But we'll work on that. Next.
Article 5 is about meetings. Next to membership, meetings is also very important, because this is where all of the action happens. In democratic societies, the work of the organization is often done inside committees, and the committees bring their work to the assembly, and the assembly says, yeah, you did a great job and we agree to this, or no, we don't agree to this, but if we make these changes, we can agree to this, or we just don't agree to this, and we're going to give this work to someone else or something. But meetings is where the action happens. And so all of the procedures in parliamentary rule come into play in the meeting itself. And that's why it's really important to be skilled in how to handle this stuff, because that's where the action is. And so it's important to lay out when the meetings are and the process for notification. There's counties who I suspect violate the state law about notification of reorganization meetings. It says that state law says that everyone has to be notified of the meetings. Because of the expense of mailing, I'm not sure that everyone gets a actual mailed notice. And so they think that rely upon email is an acceptable form. It is if it has been agreed to by the membership. And if the membership agrees to it, they have to understand the limitations of email. Like, a lot of messages get sent into your junk folder, and so you don't see them. And so they fulfill the letter of the law, even though they've not actually notified you of the meetings. But this goes back to fundamental parliamentary procedure. As a member of an organization, you have the right to attend meetings and to vote in meetings and speak in meetings. So the first section of the article on meetings should fix the day in which regular meetings are held. And then if you don't actually want to nail this down into the bylaws, and you being the organization, you can say, unless otherwise ordered by the society, and then you can have the date set by a resolution. So like the counties have to do a reorganization within every 25 months. And once you have a new administration and new membership, you might want to change your meeting from the 4th Monday of each month to the 2nd Tuesday of each month. And so if you haven't baked this into the bylaws, you can do this by resolution. But it should be easy to find out when the meeting is. It shouldn't be a mystery. If you were a member of an organization, you should not have to beat your way into a meeting. You should be notified of a meeting, and if it's not specified explicitly in the bylaws, and And of course, this implies then that as a member of an organization, you've read the bylaws and you know when the meeting is supposed to occur. But this is how you ensure your participation in the organization. Next slide is about by resolution. So yes, if the bylaws allow for setting the date by resolution, it should also provide for the number of days notice required for regular meetings. You don't want to have a leadership that says, oh, you know, we're going to have a membership meeting in 15 minutes because we don't want you know, X number of people attending this to muck up our evil plans for controlling the world. You need to have a adequate amount of time specified in the bylaws for notification, so you have the opportunity to attend if at all possible.
We have a question from Dennis that kind of more addresses the rules of the assembly, I believe. But Dennis says, here, let me put it on screen. I keep forgetting I can do that. Here. As a member, can I call for a meeting if something important has to be dealt with, or how often do meetings happen? I think is what he's asking. And you know, what are the rights of a member to say, hey, we need to talk about this?
Excellent question, because it is addressed on the next slide.
Well, there you go.
The first one is a separate section should be provided for a periodic meeting to elect officers and other relevant business that you do, like every 2 years or every year. But what Dennis is asking about is what is called special meetings. And so, number one, if you want to allow for special meetings, you have to say so in the bylaws, and that's a common provision to have. And then they typically say that the special, you know, the notice requirements for the special meeting. So everyone who's a member knows that a special meeting is being called, and then the topic that's going to be discussed. So if they are deciding whether to pick theme A versus theme B for the annual fundraising dinner, maybe that's not so important to you and you have something else to do that night and you go do that. But if they are calling a special meeting to, say, recall the president or something of that nature, then you probably have much more interest in attending. And so special meetings have to be specified in the bylaws, and the notification requirements have to be articulated.
Thank you for that. I gotta address this. This is interesting. Real Jingy says, so to be a good Democrat, you've got to be a tightrope walker, always saying that you're working for the people while always supporting the party over the people. Not a good system. And you can respond to that, Larry, but I just want to say, Real, that's what the platform is for, and it's our job to enforce that platform. Am I right, Larry?
Yes. The disconnect comes not between the people and the platform, it becomes between the platform and the legislators. And so when you talk, people often talk about the Democratic Party, and it's not clear which aspect of it that they're talking about, because sometimes they're talking about the legislative members who are Democrats, and sometimes they talk about the Democratic Party officers, and sometimes they talk about Democrats in general, or maybe the dark state that exists that seems to pull strings in the background. Yeah, in all the other stuff, like the dark state is not authorized. They just operate on their own. But in terms of the actual relationship, you have the Democratic Party of Oregon, which is made up of elected officials by representatives of the people, which are the precinct committee persons, and they write the platform, which is the beliefs of the party. And if there's a disconnect, and we do have several disconnects, there's a disconnect between the carrying out the platform by who we elect to the legislature, and that's why we have to be very careful about who we elect and make sure that those who are not adhering to the platform are replaced, because they are not representing what the people want.
Well, and just it goes beyond that. Like we don't even know that our legislators read the platform. It's our job. They should be reading it, but we don't know that they do, right? We should be presenting it to them. We should be reminding them of the rules. Hey, you represent us, and here's how we'd like that done. Thank you very much, employee. Right? Even with the good ones. I like Jeff Merkley, but I want to know why he voted for the military budget. That's you know, our party platform kind of says we're really not interested in that stuff. So, you know, what is it? And other things like we've got Dems that may be good or bad, right? But they're taking fossil fuel money. And we have this little loophole written into the DPO saying, but that's going to be okay so we can take care of labor. That's BS. But it's our job to change that. It's our job to go to those people and say, if you want to be a Democrat, you're not going to take Jordan Cove money or we're going to vote you out. These are the rules. Right? But just like every employee, it's up to management to get the employees to follow the rules. So, carry on.
Any other questions?
All Dennis was want to know is how often do meetings happen, but that really, I mean, the county meetings are monthly and then the state is quarterly, right? Is that?
That's the current pattern, but it can be whatever the assembly decides. So remember, all power resides in the assembly, and so if you want to meet on a weekly basis, you can. If a majority wants to do that, they can do that.
Okay, and then the other thing, Dennis, is there's committees, and those meet whenever they decide to meet, right, or whatever the rules say.
Yeah, it depends on how the rules are written. So ideally, you've specified that the committees will meet on a certain frequency. Otherwise, anything that's not stated in the bylaws defaults to what's in Robert's rules, and some of it gets a little gauzy, in its definition.
All right.
But we do have the process, and I think we established that with who can call meetings. If you have a chair who is being a dick and doesn't want to call a meeting because he doesn't want you to take actions that the majority want to take, the two people can call a meeting, and if you achieve a quorum, then the actions of that committee are valid.
That's pretty much power to the people right there. So,
yeah.
Way to go.
If you're missing the concept of democracy, then that probably doesn't sound right to you. We have people like that. We have people who think we elect people to lead us, and we should do what they say. We should follow them blindly, but that's not true.
We don't elect them to lead. That's a big. I love the fact that I'm seeing that in we elect them to serve.
Yes.
Serve. Moving on.
And speaking of quorum, so the quorums for all meetings should be established in a section of this article. The default is what is in parliamentary procedure, and it's a little high. It's a quorum is a majority. And so if you have a membership of 2,000 people, it's probably going to be challenging for 1,000 people to get together,
wow.
1,001 people to get together.
Yeah.
So you want a quorum to be something that's generally achievable.
What is it for the state? You just kind of went through that. What does it take to achieve a quorum in the DPO?
I believe a quorum is something like 40% of the membership. It's right now there's around 170 delegates, and a quorum is somewhere in the 50s.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it's based on the delegates. Okay.
That's not a good system, and it's not what's recommended. The Robert's Rules really prefers you to be very clear about it, so it's not a moving target.
Right.
So it's not ambiguous on whether or not a quorum is achieved.
So it'd rather be a solid number than a percentage, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and in Clatsop County, if we have 5 members, it's a quorum.
Wow. Okay. That's easy to achieve. You would think.
Yeah, you would think.
You would think. Where are we at here?
Executive Board, Article 6.
All right.
So this is, unless you want to be like the Athenians and have everyone vote on everything all the time, it's a good idea to delegate some responsibilities to the Executive Board and your leadership. And so this article is where you define the board's composition, delineate the powers of the board, like do they have full authority in between regular meetings, or are all of their decisions up for ratification at the next meeting, and also set forth any special rules on the conduct of their business and how often is to meet and what a quorum of the board is. So all that stuff belongs in Article 6. Article 7 is where the committees are established. And so, as I said earlier, this is where the actual work of the organization happens. So if you want a resolution written opposing fossil fuels, blah, 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 you can move that that the platform and resolutions committee, if you have such a thing, write a resolution. And that's how you delegate work to people who are knowledgeable about the writing of resolutions and can write good language surrounding them to express what you really want to achieve. But the article on committees should provide for the establishment of each of the standing committees. So these are the people who will actually carry out the work. In the Democratic Party of Oregon, we have the Rules Committee, the Platform and Resolutions Committee, we have the State Fair and Events Committee, and we have the Credentials Committee, and it feels like there's one more, but these are the ongoing committees. And then the chair has the ability to appoint special committees to do specific tasks for something that doesn't fall within the purview of the standing committees.
Recently had an issue with that as well, right? Where it was assumed one group took care of something, but it was really the responsibility of another group, correct?
Yes, and that's it's not clear that that's been completely resolved. We did establish a committee to begin the process of working on the rules for the delegate selection convention in 2020, even though the predominant amount of that work will occur under the next group. So we're going to be electing all new members to the Rules Committee at the reorganization, well, after the reorganization meeting next year, to carry on. And so they will get the most of the work for that. But yeah, I think we made it clear that that's where it belongs. And if it's not, we can always take this to the assembly and have it clarified there.
There you go. Hope that answers your question. Dennis was just saying that he meets with his party every 2 weeks to discuss what's going on. So
that's intense.
Yeah, it's intense. But they have much small. I believe I asked him how many people show up, but I think they have much smaller, places. And Jeffrey Pearson was just saying distance is a major factor in determining how many people show up, right? Especially in a place like CD2, so yeah. Moving on. Or what? What do you want to say?
Just to the point on the next slide is, if no article on committees is included in the bylaws, standing and special committees are established as directed by the society. So again, this is another example of where the power is held by the assembly, and unless it has been given to someone to establish or established in the bylaws, then it defaults to the society. And you can create things by making a motion inside the meeting. This has been the epiphany for a lot of people in the last couple of years. It's like, oh my God, you can make a motion to do that. It's like, yeah, as long as a majority agrees to it. That's how democracy functions. It's a decision by the majority in the group.
Got a response from Dennis here. He says, most of the time it's about 30 people that show up, and then quarterly around 100 people. So
holy cow, 100 is a lot.
Yeah, it is. And that's for his little area. I mean, I don't know what that is, a county or a city, or they got Germany divided up differently. They have states. Did you know they have states? Anyway, go
on. Article 8 is a fairly simple one, but this is where you state your parliamentary authority. So there are, as we said earlier, a number of options that you can use. You do not have to have Robert's rules, although that's the most commonly used. But this is where you establish the default rules, and there are differences amongst them, and so it does make a little bit of difference, although since they're all basically based on parliamentary procedure, this is basically different shades of parliamentary procedure as opposed to something dramatically dramatically different. Like you're not going to find decisions by drum circle consensus stuff or anything like that. So the next slide is the language that should be in your bylaws to keep you clear and clean on this. It should say that the rules contained in the current edition of, and then specify your manual of parliamentary practice, shall govern the society in all cases to which they are applicable and in which they are not inconsistent with these bylaws and any special rules of order the society may adopt. So that's the language that keeps you clean. And finally, amendment of the bylaws. So you have to have a process by which the bylaws can be amended. Robert's Rules recommends that you do bylaws changes by a 2/3 vote. They also recommend that you give advance notice so that people know that you're changing the rules. They might be more inclined to attend a meeting and not do something else if you're doing something fundamentally opposed to what they believe in. But you do need to provide a process for amending the bylaws.
Excellent.
So I added a couple of slides about the principles of interpretation because sometimes English is not as clear as we wish. So the first point is each society decides for itself the meaning of the bylaws. So if you have an instance where the bylaw states something and the chair has interpreted that one way and a majority disagrees, then you can appeal the ruling of the chair. And this is a process that we talked about previously. You can appeal the ruling of the chair, and the body then decides on the interpretation of the bylaws. It's not the parliamentarian, it's not the chair, it's the body itself who gets to decide the meaning of anything that might be ambiguous. Intent plays no role unless the meaning is unclear or uncertain, but where ambiguity exists, a majority vote is all that is required to decide the question. So for the point you were asking about earlier, John, about who does the Rules Committee own the rules for the delegate selection conventions, if there ends up being a disagreement still over this, then we can put the question to the Assembly and they can decide.
Cool. Okay. So,
however, the bylaws are very clear, so it's kind of hard. There's no ambiguity, so it's hard to argue against something where there's no ambiguity. Yeah. Although I'm sure there's people who would find a way to do that.
Yes, always. Just an update from Dennis on our understanding of German democracy. He's a member of the Left Party, the true Left Party, so like Democratic Socialists. About 3,000 people show up to their convention, and there are 16 states in Germany, everybody. Thank you, Dennis. So, there you go.
Next slide on principles of interpretation. A general statement or rule is always of less authority than a specific statement or rule and yields to it. So if something is very specific and there's another area that talks about the same subject matter but is more general, then this is just saying that the specific wording trumps the general. And then if bylaws authorize certain things specifically, other things of the same class are thereby prohibited. So this is going back to the listing of standing committees. If you have 5 standing committees that are listed in your bylaws, there can be no other standing committees created unless the bylaws authorize it or you change the bylaws.
Okay, so the chair or somebody could suggest making a new committee, but then everybody has to vote on it.
Yeah, if the bylaws don't grant the authority to create special committees to somebody, then the Assembly has to do it.
All right.
And then now the final one, I believe, is a provision granting certain privileges carries with it the right to a part of the privilege, but prohibits a greater privilege. So that means you can't take something and then expand it to more powers than what has been stated. Giving notice on amendments. So in addition to stating that you're going to be modifying the bylaws, you also need to state specifically in the notice what is being changed. This is something that we need to fix inside the Democratic Party of Oregon, because usually the language is waved at, if we're lucky, and people don't understand what is being voted on until they show up at the meeting and they see the language written out in front of them. So according to parliamentary procedure and Robert's Rules of Order, you need to state the changes that are being made to the bylaws in the notice of the meeting, so people know what is being voted on and whether they should make an effort to attend. And it needs to be very specific, specific language that you're changing. Also, any member can give notice unless the bylaws have placed limitations on who can amend the bylaws. Under good practices, showing the existing bylaw and the bylaw with the proposed changes in parallel columns is a good device, so long as the exact amendment stated in a formal manner is set out at the top of across both columns. So if you have well-written proposed bylaws changes, you often see the wording of the bylaw stated at the top, the current language, and then the revised language next to it. So it's easy for people to see what you're changing. The ultimate objective of parliamentary procedure is to make sure everyone understands what they're voting on and there's nothing hidden from them, so they can make the best decision possible. When changes take effect, an amendment to the bylaws goes into effect immediately upon its adoption unless the motion to adopt specifies another time. So if your intent is for this to take an effect after the meeting or at some point in the time in the future, then your motion to adopt this should state so. Otherwise, it takes effect immediately. And this is something that we learned the hard way. Bylaws cannot be rescinded or reconsidered. So those of you who are familiar with the more esoteric tools in the toolbox might want to rescind a bylaws change, but it turns out that you cannot rescind bylaws. If you change them and you want to change them back, you follow the same procedure of publicizing the change and voting on them by a 2/3 majority to change them back. You can't just vote to rescind them.
Okay, so you can't just go reverse, pull a reverse card. You just gotta.
Right. So common good practices, in general, it's not a good practice to redundantly list state statutes and rules of order in the bylaws, although sometimes this is helpful. If to avoid complete redundancy, it means that if you want to study something, you have to have the state statutes and the bylaws and the standing rules and all this stuff laid out in front of you. Sometimes it's just more efficient to state in the bylaws the Oregon statute, but then you run the risk of the statute changing, and so you're out of sync with the state. But clearly the state, whatever is the current state law, that trumps what you have inside your bylaws. And then baking rules of order into bylaws becomes confusing as to what can be suspended. So the bottom line for bylaws is you can't suspend bylaws, but you can suspend bylaws if they are addressing parliamentary procedure, and that's a kind of a hard one to understand if you've not really dug into the difference between these two things and understand what a parliamentary procedure is as opposed to something else. But it just makes it a very wordy and redundant document if you start having to build all of this stuff inside your bylaws. I was looking at a set of bylaws that says that the chair must maintain a stack of people in the order that they've indicated they wish to speak. That is getting a little too prescriptive, and you should really be allowed to allow the chair some latitude on who to choose to speak, because you want to get differences of opinion and have a good debate. But usually you find those kinds of things being put into bylaws as a symptom of bad behavior on the part of the leadership. I mean, they just have to keep screwing down the rules until you've stated everything that they have to do, and then give them no wiggle room. And be cognizant of the distinction between among bylaws, rules of order, standing rules, and special rules. Um, a good set of bylaws is roughly 5 to 10 pages. There's a couple of counties. I know there's one county that has a 29-page set of bylaws, which in itself is a very, very long document in order that you have to understand. That's a lot of rules. And I think it's that long because they have put a bunch of procedural stuff into the bylaws, which really weighs down them. You really should have standing rules that separate out all of the procedural stuff and gives you more flexibility in how you handle things.
Nice. Here's a nice comment from Environmental Coffee House. How are you doing out there? Says this series is really good. I share it with the Democratic Committee here in my small community. They need their parliamentarian to learn this material. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's always awkward. There's a lot of self-appointed parliamentarians who think that because they own a copy of a book, it's like owning a gym membership. If you don't go to the gym, a gym membership doesn't do you any good. And just owning a copy of Robert's Rules doesn't do you any good if you don't understand what they mean and how they are used to implement democracy. If your bylaws need a tune-up, my recommendation is that you start from a 30,000-foot level and you establish the article structure and state that you want to have. So make sure that you've articulated the articles that you want to have, and then introduce the changes no more than an article at a time. So if you want to revise like the officers, or if you want to revise the committees, do those at separate times, because over the past couple of years, I've seen a couple of county committees try to do a wholesale rewrite, and there's always people that are suspicious and just resist those kinds of changes because it's too much to understand, especially if you've got a 29-page document. It's you might agree with 80% of it, but then there's the 20% that you don't want to agree with, and you can't address it in one meeting if you want to have a debate over each one of the changes that you disagree with. So, attempting a complete overhaul is too much, and I would highly recommend that you break it up into comprehensible amounts of change. Just doing one article is probably going to be a substantive discussion in itself. And what you want to do is end up with something that a majority of the people are behind, because if you have a majority behind the bylaws, then you have a mandate to adhere to the bylaws. If you don't have a majority standing behind your bylaws, then you don't have a mandate. And I believe this is my final slide, what to watch for. And this is where we've been on the happy path and we've trusted our leadership. You really need to go through your bylaws and look at how power has been transferred from the assembly to officers and boards and committees. And as I said earlier, sometimes there's things where you transfer power as a matter of convenience, like setting the venue. You don't need everyone to vote on the venue unless you want everyone to vote on the venue, or the start time of the meeting. Those kinds of things can typically be allocated to the chair or to someone else, and relieve the assembly of those kinds of transactional, mundane decisions, and decide upon them more efficiently. The things to watch out for are who can call meetings. Sometimes, there's this enormous distrust of democracy and people, and so you want to, they've somehow baked into the bylaws that only certain people can call meetings. You should always have a option for the membership to call a meeting in case you end up with a bunch of bad apples in the leadership. Look at who makes appointments. Watch who controls the agenda. So ultimately the assembly should control the agenda. Sometimes the bylaws are written so that it appears that the agenda has been given over to the chair, and then they abuse their authority. Watch for limits that exist on motions that you can make. Like in the Democratic Party, there's a there's a line in the bylaws that says that you cannot amend motions from the Rules Committee from the floor. So it's either an up or down vote. There's reasons why this is a good idea. You've already had the people in the committee dig into the subject matter and debate it, and either you should be able to trust them to do the right thing, unless you just totally disagree with what they've done and you want to send it back. But make sure that you agree with the limits that have been placed upon you, the assembly. And then who makes decisions and place the assembly? Everything that has been transferred from the assembly to someone else, just make sure that you've not given away too much. So that's the end of the discussion on bylaws. Is there any final questions?
No final questions. That was really good. Just another comment here from Tracy Carlos. I've also been sharing the videos with the Thurston County Dems here in Washington. So thank you, Tracy.
I'm honored. Thank you, Tracy.
And yeah, it's excellent. No, we've got 13 people here watching right now on a Sunday. It's good. Good for democracy. So, no, it's good. That was great. It seems like the DNC's lost some of this. Limits on who does what and control of who does what. And
yeah, I would really like to carve out some time, track down the bylaws and see what they've done, because I was a delegate to the DNC, and I would go to these meetings and it would be just a bunch of fluff, and I missed, because I was a replacement delegate, I didn't do the voting piece at the very initial meeting of the term of office, and so it was pretty much a waste of time for me. But there's got to be ways to step in and influence. I think our delegation from Oregon did a fairly good job of weighing in on things like the superdelegate changes that were made inside the party. Those are the kinds of things where we have to figure out where the levers of control are, and as hard as it would be, work with other states to get coalitions together to pass some of these changes that need to be done, so that the decisions are truly pushed back to the people and not just at the direction of whoever. I actually don't know who runs the party right now. Allegedly it's what's his name, the chair,
Tom
Perez.
Yeah, Tom.
But is it him, or is there some dark state behind him that's doing everything?
How did he get his job? Who elects him?
He was elected by the delegates.
So were you one of the, like in 2016? That was when we picked? No,
that was after. It was after the election. Okay. So remember, it was Keith Ellison versus Perez versus a host of other people.
Right, and we were looking at Keith, but Tom won. Right, and then they made him co-chair to make the Bernie people feel better, and then Keith disappeared. So yeah, I remember that. Remember they tried the Unity concert tour with Keith and Tom, and that was like 3 shows, and then they canceled that tour. I remember that. Anyway, the question being, would our opportunity be to remove Tom and to replace other people in similar positions of power like Tom? When does that come?
My guess is that is a 4-year term of office. And so he's probably, because our delegates are also for 4 years. So my guess is that his election will come up after the next presidential election in 2020. So it'll probably be beginning of 2021.
And we need to have more delegates than the establishment at the convention in order to put our people in power, is basically what it comes down to, right?
Yes.
And we were close.
We need to.
Last time.
But then, we get situations like California where they've got this really evolved structure, and so there's all these legacy people hanging out that are not representing the people, and so we have to map out how all these positions are filled, and then do adequate planning to get people elected to them who actually represent the people and not corporations. And I know that sounds trite, but that's really what it boils down to.
It really does. It's just a lot of these people have been in power so long that they're really difficult to get rid of. And that's what I think it's a lot of the doom and gloom. Davy Z says, I'm in a place where I feel defeated, no hope, gloom and doom, no light at the end of the tunnel. They're so arrogant that they're doing what they used to do privately, live in color. And that's true, that the kind of the behind the scenes were like, they came out and said, yep, that's what we do. You can't stop us, right? And it does feel like they've taken that power away from us. But what we're doing here is how we have to climb to the top, right?
Yes, in places, in states where they are disenfranchising voters and throwing people off voter rolls illegally, people have to say no more of this shit. We have to stop this. We have to allow people who are eligible to vote. And it is beyond me how people in these states put up with this. I don't even understand the mentality that would allow a state to, people in that state to this stuff to occur, along with gerrymandering. The creation of districts that are so overwhelmingly gerrymandered that makes no sense for anyone to run for office there, and unless we get something like a blue wave, which hopefully, if all goes well, we will get a good solid blue majority in the state legislatures. And because this is the set of legislators who will be drawing the districts after the census is complete, it can be cleaned up.
We hope. Depends on who we elect, because any blue will not do. And we're learning that with like Joe Manchin, right, everybody? Right. We had a perfectly good... The thing is, Larry, and I just want to say this, media has done the job of... This is why people vote for who they do, because we're fighting a narrative that we just don't have the power to... you and I right here, we don't change that narrative enough yet, right? That's part of what we're working on. And I know, just real quick... For Environmental Coffee House says this, and I agree. This is exactly what we're doing here. This is the battle. The progressives will have to claw their way through the muck and mire of leftover neoliberals. Yes. That's exactly...
That's what we're doing.
That's exactly what we're doing. All right. What else do you have to say in this, Larry? It's a great presentation.
Just organizational information for anyone who wants to join us, and we extend this to our friends in Germany if they would like to join us as well. So we have established a electronic unit for the study of parliamentary procedure. So all the stuff that we are talking about here today, it's always good to meet with people who have a more in-depth understanding of this, so that they can share their knowledge and you can get a better appreciation of how democracy works. So we've established a electronic unit. And the intention is to provide a way for people to study who are not in a metropolitan area with an existing group that meets physically. This unit is being organized within the National Association of Parliamentarians. We just got a green light to finish off our accreditation. And our unit is associated with the Oregon Association of Parliamentarians, but really that doesn't preclude people from joining from other states and other countries. If you would like to join, you just need to be a member to pass a quiz, and this would allow you to be a member of the National Association of Parliamentarians. But you don't even have to do that. You can be a provisional member. There's a nominal fee to join the National Association of Parliamentarians, but we have a scholarship program that would take care of that. That's been pledged by our president. So we will make this easy for you to do. There's actually a dearth of people familiar with the subject matter, and there's actually a high demand for parliamentarians.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. And you're talking, the ones that cruise around the world and do these big shows, or just anywhere.
Yeah, and all you do is advise.
Yeah.
If you're interested in taking exams, just reach out to us, and we will make sure that there's a way for you to take it. And you sign up at pdpo.org. or you can send a message to me at larry@uphillmedia.org.
Yay.
And then the final slide is the reference material. And I have to backtrack on a statement I've been making recently. There is no impending version of Robert's Rules Edition 12.
No? Oh.
It's still scheduled for 2020. So the current edition, 11th edition, is going to be valid for the next 2 years. So this also means that you don't get to buy the Kindle version until the 12th edition comes out. But the slide on the left is Robert's Rules of Order 11th edition, and that's the reference material that is used in all of these discussions. To pass the qualifying exam, all you need to do is understand the contents of the middle book, which is Robert's Rules of Order newly revised in brief. That covers 80% of the stuff that you'll ever encounter inside a meeting, and presents it in a very clear manner, and you should be able to read that in a day. And then if you are really serious about becoming a parliamentarian and understanding the material, you can get the study guide for the National Association of Parliamentarians registration exam. That has the 1,200 questions that you find on the exams, and you can study them in advance. And really, that is how you get a more foundational understanding of this material, is by going through the exam itself.
That's awesome. And everybody, Larry took these exams, and they're really huge. And now he is an official Jedi of parliamentary procedure. And that's really what parliamentarians are. They're the Jedi of democracy. So
I'm not a Jedi yet.
Oh, you're Padawan still? Okay, you're in training.
I have one test to pass on the 19th.
Awesome.
And I'm still waiting for the results of the exam I took in August. They were apparently sent to somebody to grade who was in a hurricane, and so their life became by doing other things like bailing out their house. So someone out there is grading my exam, and I'll find out if I passed it.
Hopefully, it didn't get shredded in the wind or something. You know,
I know.
I'm sure it's electronic. All right. Well, that was awesome. We good? We're done.
And you have a slide to share with us, John?
I have a slide and a song. Always a slide and a song. And in the interest of protest, so just everybody, just hold your rage. All right. We've been, those of us who are burners, who recently woke, like me, started in 2015. We're all raging right now over what's going on. And there's people like Larry who have been fighting this crap for decades, and other people that have been fighting it, like Bernie, since they were young and getting arrested for civil rights stuff in the 60s. And you got to imagine he's depressed at this point, right? And if Bernie Sanders can keep going at his age, and after all the crap he's seen in our government, we should be able to do that. Right? And I thought this would be appropriate for everybody. We've reached this stage with Feeling the Burn, and it's just learning the rules and taking power, because it actually belongs to us. We're going to go out with Pussy Riot. Make America Great Again. It's probably going to get blocked by copyright or by YouTube, censored for the material, because I don't know if you've noticed, but recently we've been getting censored. Any material that's really related to revolution or riling up the people or politically sensitive, getting censored, which is very much like Germany in 1934, 35-ish. But I just want to say this. This is a rock band of women in a country that is far more brutal and fascist, although we're catching up quick. And they have the courage to be arrested, to have their lives threatened, to make material that is definitely anti-government, anti-fascist, and this one's anti-Trump Nazi government. And I just want to say, if this band of women musicians can have the courage to do this, we should be able to learn our bylaws and take action in our democracy and fix this stuff. That should be like a minimal effort, right? So, Feel the Burn, everybody. Keep going. Thank you, Larry, for all that you do. And thank you, everybody, for supporting this channel. We will see you, I don't know, maybe midweek. Maybe we'll do something weird midweek. Yeah. Pussy Riot. Make America Great Again. Remember, it's probably going to get blocked, so we'll back it off later, but go to the URL and learn something.
A Trump News Network special report.
We are glad to announce billionaire and everybody's favorite Donald Trump has won the presidential elections.
We are going to make America so great again.
Donald Trump made his first visit to Washington.
People have been maced, and the police look like they're blocking them in.
No more Muslims.
These are people that nobody knows who they are.
We better be careful.
No more Mexicans.
We're going to stop it, and we're going to build a wall.
You have to come in to be an American.
They're troublemakers. They're no good. We've got to take our country back, folks.
You know our job? No. Tell us, bitch, yeah, that's right.
Speak American.
What is this? Look at this. Russian fucking passport.
Sign American.
What are you doing here?
Yeah, man.
What are you doing
You're going to understand. Break your fucking neck. You're going to understand. Put your hand down.
Outsider.
No more small breasts.
What do you want your world to look like? What do you want it to be? Do you know that the wall has two sides and nobody is free? Did your mama come from Mexico? Papa come from Palestine? Sneaking all through Syria, crossing all the borderlines. Let other people in. Listen to your women. Stop killing black children. Make America great again.
No more fat pigs.
Burn, pig. Keep going. Hey there. That's good. Push your head.
Let other people in. Listen to your women. Stop killing black children. Make America great again.
Guilty. No more gay or lesbian.
Could you imagine a politician calling a woman a dog? Do you wanna stay in the kitchen? Is that where you belong? How do you picture the perfect leader? How do you want him to be? Has he promoted the use of torture and killing families? Did your mama come from Mexico? Papa come from Palestine? Sneaking all through Syria, crossing all the borderlines. Let other people in. Listen to your women. Stop killing black children. Make America great again.
Knock the crap out of them, would you?
Let other people in.
I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
Listen to your women. Stop killing black children. Make America great again.
We'll see you tomorrow.
And I love the women.
Did your mama come from Mexico? Papa come from Palestine? Sneaking all through Syria, crossing all the borderlines.
No more abortions.
Let other people in. Listen to your women. Stop killing black children. Make America great again. Let other people in. Listen to your women. Stop killing black children. Make America great again.
Sadly, the American dream is dead. I will bring it back. Bigger and better and stronger than ever before.
Trump will make America great again.